The rattling of the stagecoach wheels grinding to a halt stirred Winona Hayes from her restless sleep. Dust swirled through the open window, settling on her travel-worn dress as the driver called out their arrival in Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1876. Her eyes, red-rimmed from crying, surveyed the bustling frontier town through the grimy window. This desolate place would be her refuge, the farthest she could get from the family that had shattered her world. Winona clutched the small leather bag containing everything she owned. 3 days ago, she'd been the wife of Thomas Hayes, living in his family's sprawling estate in Missouri. Now she was a widow, banished by her husband's family after his unexpected death from fever, their cruel words still ringing in her ears. "You brought nothing to this marriage, and you'll leave with nothing." The driver opened the door. "Silver Creek, madam." End of the line. Winona stepped down, her boots landing in the dusty street. The mountain air was thin and cool compared to Missouri's humidity. She stood uncertainly as the driver unloaded her single trunk. Around her, Silver Creek bustled with activity, miners, traders, and townsfolk going about their business, paying no attention to another newcomer. "You need directions, madam?" the driver asked, already preparing to leave. "The boarding house," she replied softly. "Mrs. Holloway's." He pointed toward a 2-story building a few blocks down. "Right there. Safe travels." With that, he climbed back onto his seat, leaving Winona alone with her meager possessions. She was 22 years old, widowed, and starting over in a town where she knew no one. The weight of her circumstances pressed down on her shoulders as she reached for her trunk. It was heavier than she remembered. "Allow me, madam." The deep voice startled her. Winona looked up to find a tall man standing beside her. His face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see he had a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt, denim pants, and a leather vest that had seen better days. Unlike the businessmen she was accustomed to in Missouri, everything about him spoke of hard work under the open sky. "I'm headed that way myself," he said, nodding toward the boarding house. "Thank you, but I couldn't impose," Winona replied, her upbringing making her hesitant to accept help from a stranger. He lifted the trunk effortlessly. "Noim Beshishchin." "Name's Preston Callahan." "Most folks just call me President Winona Hayes," she offered, falling into step beside him. "I've just arrived from Missouri." "I figured as much," he said, a hint of a smile in his voice. "Folks who've lived here a while know better than to wear clothes that fine in our dusty streets." Winona glanced down at her travel dress. Though rumpled from the journey, it was still noticeably finer than what the local women wore. She would need to adapt quickly if she wanted to blend in. "Is Silver Creek always this busy?" she asked, taking in the bustling main street. "Only on days ending in Y," Preston replied with a slight chuckle. "The silver mine keeps everyone working and spending." "You have family here?" The innocent question stung.
"No."
"No family." Something in her tone must have warned him not to pursue that line of conversation. They walked the rest of the way in silence, Preston carrying her trunk as if it weighed nothing. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was a neat, 2-story building with white lace curtains in the windows. When they reached the door, Preston set down the trunk. "Mrs. Holloway runs a good place. Respectable. You'll be safe here until you get your bearings," he said, removing his hat briefly. His hair was dark brown, with strands of gold where the sun had lightened it. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking blue like the sky after a storm. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." "Preston," he corrected. "Or President, we're not much for formality out here." He hesitated, then added, "If you need work, my sister Rose runs the mercantile." She mentioned needing help. Before Winona could respond, the door opened to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "You must be Mrs. Hayes," she said. "I've been expecting you. The stagecoach is usually more punctual." "Trouble with a wheel outside of Cheyenne?" Preston explained. "I should be going." "Good day, Mrs. Holloway. Mrs. Hayes." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, striding down the street with the easy gait of a man comfortable in his own skin. Mrs. Holloway ushered Winona inside. "Don't mind Preston Callahan. He's one of the good ones, owns the largest cattle spread north of town. Now, let me show you to your room. You must be exhausted." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A window overlooked the main street, letting in the afternoon sunlight. It was a far cry from the luxury she'd known as Thomas's wife, but it was hers. "Supper's at 6, Mrs. Holloway informed her. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. We share, I'm afraid, but everyone's respectful of privacy. The rules are simple: no gentlemen callers in the rooms, no liquor, and rent is due every Monday." When the landlady left, Winona sank onto the bed. Alone at last, she allowed herself a moment of despair. How had her life changed so dramatically in such a short time? 1 month ago, she'd been planning a small garden party. Now she was a widow in a strange town, with barely enough money to last 3 months. She unpacked her trunk, hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe. Among the garments was one of Thomas's handkerchiefs, monogrammed with his initials. She held it to her face, but it no longer carried his scent. Their marriage had been arranged, not a love match, but Thomas had been kind. His family, however, had always made it clear they considered her beneath them, a poor relation taken in as a wife out of obligation to her late father, who had once saved Thomas's father from financial ruin. When Thomas died childless after only 2 years of marriage, his mother had wasted no time in making her position clear. "You brought nothing to this family, and you'll take nothing away," she had declared, giving Winona a week to leave their home. Only her late father's pocket watch and her mother's locket had real value among her possessions, and she'd vowed to sell them only as a last resort. Practical by nature, Winona knew she needed employment immediately. Preston Callahan's mention of his sister's mercantile seemed like providence. Tomorrow, she would seek out Rose Callahan and inquire about work. At supper, she met the other boarders, 2 schoolteachers, a seamstress, and an elderly woman who read palms for a living. They were curious about the newcomer, but respectful of her privacy. Winona offered only that she was a recent widow seeking a fresh start. It was enough to satisfy them for the moment. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the sounds of the frontier town settling down for the night, Winona made a promise to herself. She would not only survive in Silver Creek, she would build a new life, one where she answered to no one but herself. The morning light streamed through the thin curtains, waking Winona earlier than she'd intended. Outside, Silver Creek was already coming to life, with wagons rumbling down the main street and shopkeepers opening their establishments. She dressed carefully in her plainest dress, a gray wool that would show dust less readily than her others, and arranged her honey blonde hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. After a breakfast of cornbread and coffee with the other boarders, Winona set out to find the mercantile. Mrs. Holloway had given her directions, and she found it easily a large storefront with Callahan's General Mercantile painted in bold letters across the window. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. The store was well stocked, with shelves reaching to the ceiling filled with everything from canned goods to tools, fabric to medicines. A pretty woman with dark hair pinned up in a practical style was measuring fabric for a customer. She looked up at the sound of the bell and smiled warmly. "I'll be with you in just a moment," she called. Winona nodded and took the opportunity to look around. The store was organized meticulously, clearly run by someone with an eye for detail. When the other customer left with her purchase, the dark-haired woman approached. "Good morning. I don't believe we've met. I'm Rose Callahan. Winona Hayes. I arrived yesterday from Missouri." Recognition dawned in Rose's eyes. "Preston mentioned you. Said you might be looking for employment." "Yes," Winona admitted. "I find myself in need of work." Rose studied her thoughtfully. Have you worked in a store before? No, but I'm a quick learner. I can read and cipher, and I'm good with organization. That's a start. Can you sew? Very well, actually. My mother taught me. Rose smiled. That's even better. I've been wanting to expand into dressmaking, but I haven't had the time. We could start you as a general assistant, and if things work out, perhaps you could help develop that side of the business. They discussed hours and wages, and by the end of the conversation, Winona had secured employment starting the following day. The pay was modest, but combined with her small savings, it would allow her to remain at the boarding house while she established herself. As Rose wrapped up their conversation, the bell jingled again. Preston Callahan entered, carrying a crate that appeared heavy. "Where do you want these supplies, Rose?" he asked before noticing Winona. Surprise registered on his face. "Mrs. Hayes." "Good morning." "Mr. Callahan," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Preston," he corrected automatically. "Preston," she conceded. He set the crate down behind the counter. "Did Rose offer you that job?" "She did, and I accepted. I start tomorrow." He nodded, appearing pleased. "Rose is the brains of the family. You'll be in good hands." "And what does that make you?" Rose teased, organizing items from the crate. "The muscle, obviously," he replied with a grin that transformed his weathered face, making him look younger and more approachable. Winona found herself smiling in response before she caught herself. It felt almost disloyal to Thomas, though her mourning period had technically ended months ago. "I should return to the boarding house," she said. "I'll be here at 8 tomorrow, Miss Callahan." "Rose, please," the shopkeeper insisted. "And I look forward to it." As Winona turned to leave, Preston spoke up. "I'm headed back that way. I'll walk with you if you don't mind the company." She hesitated but couldn't think of a polite reason to refuse. "Thank you." Outside, the morning had warmed considerably, and more people filled the streets. Preston fell into step beside her, shortening his stride to match hers. "Rose likes you," he commented. "She's a good judge of character." "I'm grateful for the opportunity." "May I ask what brings you to Silver Creek?" "It's not exactly on the way to anywhere." Winona considered how much to share. "My husband died 6 months ago. There was nothing to keep me in Missouri." Preston was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." She changed the subject. "Have you lived in Silver Creek long?" "Born and raised," he replied. "My father started the ranch with just 10 head of cattle. Now we run over 1,000. That's impressive." "It's been a lot of work. The Double C isn't just a ranch to me, it's my father's legacy." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. Winona found herself curious about this man who spoke so respectfully of his father's memory. "And the mercantile?" she asked. "That was Rose's idea. She never took to ranching the way I did. When she finished schooling back east, she convinced me to invest in the store. Smartest business decision I ever made." He chuckled. "She's turned it into the most successful shop in 3 counties. They reached the boarding house too quickly. Preston removed his hat as they stopped at the entrance. "Thank you for walking with me," Winona said formally. "My pleasure. I expect our paths will cross often, now that you'll be working with Rose." As she watched him walk away, Winona felt a curious mixture of emotions. Preston Callahan was unlike any man she'd known in Missouri. There was something genuine about him, devoid of the pretensions that had characterized her husband's social circle. That evening, she wrote a letter to her one remaining friend in Missouri, explaining her new circumstances and providing her address in Silver Creek. As she wrote, she realized she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Working at Callahan's Mercantile proved to be exactly what Winona needed. Rose was a patient employer who took time to teach her the business from the ground up. Within a week, Winona could operate the cash register, track inventory, and assist customers with confidence. Her natural ability with numbers impressed Rose, who gradually entrusted her with more responsibilities. "You have a good head for business," Rose commented one afternoon as they balanced the day's receipts. "Most people struggle with the bookkeeping, but you seem to enjoy it." "My father was a banker," Winona explained. "He taught me mathematics from an early age. He always said a woman should understand money matters." "A progressive man, your father." "Yes, he was," Winona said softly, thinking of how disappointed he would have been to see how quickly his old friend's family had discarded his daughter after Thomas's death. The bell jingled, and Preston entered, bringing with him the scent of horses and open air. He'd become a regular visitor to the store, stopping by every few days on his way to or from the ranch. Each time, he made a point of exchanging a few words with Winona, asking about her adjustment to Silver Creek or commenting on the weather. "Ladies," he greeted them, removing his hat. "How's business today?" "Excellent," Rose replied. Mrs. Miller finally decided on fabric for her daughter's wedding dress. "Winona's going to help with the sewing." Preston's eyes turned to Winona. "You sew as well?" "I do," she acknowledged. "Rose has kindly offered to let me use the back room for dressmaking during slow periods." "She's being modest," Rose interjected. "She showed me some of her work. She's skilled enough to open her own shop." Winona felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "Hardly that. But I do enjoy creating beautiful things." Preston leaned against the counter, his blue eyes studying her with interest. "A woman of many talents. Rose might have to watch out, or you'll be running the place before long." "I assure you, I have no such ambitions," Winona said quickly. "I'm teasing," Preston clarified. "Rose actually mentioned expanding. The space next door might be available soon." "We're just talking possibilities," Rose added. "Nothing definite yet." As the siblings discussed business matters, Winona organized the ribbon display, listening with half an ear. She'd come to enjoy these moments when Preston visited. There was an easy camaraderie between the siblings that reminded her of what family could be at its best. When Preston prepared to leave, he paused by the ribbon display. "Those look nice. You have an eye for color." "Thank you," she replied, surprised by the compliment. "Rose mentioned you've been here a month now. Getting settled and all right?" "Yes, very much so. Everyone has been kind." He nodded, seeming pleased. "Some folks are organizing a community picnic this Sunday after church. Nothing fancy, just food and conversation. You might enjoy a good way to meet more people." "That sounds pleasant. Will you be attending?" "I will. In fact," he hesitated then continued, "I'd be happy to escort you if you'd like." The invitation caught her off guard. "Oh, I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition. Unless you'd rather go with Rose or your friends from the boarding house." Winona considered. It wasn't exactly a social call, more a neighborly gesture. And she had been in Silver Creek long enough that continuing to isolate herself might seem peculiar. "That's very kind of you. I would appreciate the escort. Thank you." His smile was warm. "I'll call for you at the boarding house around noon then." After he left, Rose gave Winona a speculative look. "Preston doesn't usually attend those picnics. He claims ranch work keeps him too busy. Perhaps he's making an exception for community spirit," Winona suggested, busying herself with the cash register. Rose made a noncommittal sound. "Perhaps." Sunday arrived clear and mild. Winona chose a pale blue dress that she had recently altered to better suit the more relaxed Western style. She paired it with a straw bonnet trimmed with matching ribbon, practical for the sun, yet still becoming. Mrs. Holloway noticed her preparations. "You look lovely, dear." "Special occasion." "Just the community picnic. Mr. Callahan offered to escort me." The landlady's eyebrows rose. "Preston Callahan? Well, that's interesting." "It's merely a neighborly gesture," Winona insisted. "Of course," Mrs. Holloway agreed, though her expression suggested she thought otherwise. Preston arrived precisely at noon, driving a smart buggy pulled by a handsome bay horse. He had foregone his usual ranching clothes for clean denims, a crisp white shirt, and a newer-looking vest. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his stubble. "You look nice," he said as he helped her into the buggy, his hand warm and strong around hers. "As do you," she replied, settling her skirts. The picnic was held in a meadow near the creek that gave the town its name. Quilts and blankets dotted the grass, and tables had been set up for food. It seemed the entire town had turned out, from the oldest residents to infants in arms. As they walked toward the gathering, Preston was stopped repeatedly by people wanting to talk. He introduced Winona to each person, his hand occasionally resting lightly on the small of her back to guide her through the crowd. She noticed the respect with which everyone addressed him and their curious glances at her. "Preston Callahan, you finally decided to join us," called a round-faced woman as they approached the food tables. "And with a companion, no less. Mrs. Bennett, this is Mrs. Winona Hayes. She works with Rose at the Mercantile. Mrs. Hayes, Judith Bennett runs our local newspaper." "Pleased to meet you," Winona said politely. Mrs. Bennett's eyes sparkled with interest. "Missouri, I hear? What brings you all the way to our little corner of Wyoming?" Before Winona could formulate a response that wouldn't invite further questions, Preston intervened. "Mrs. Hayes is showing remarkable restraint by not mentioning how hungry we both are after the long ride from town. Might we sample some of that famous chicken of yours?" Mrs. Bennett laughed and waved them toward the food. "Go on, then. But I'll expect an interview for the paper soon, Mrs. Hayes. New residents make excellent news in a small town." As they filled their plates, Winona murmured, "Thank you for the rescue. Judith means well, but she can be persistent. I thought you might prefer to enjoy your meal without an interrogation." They found a spot under a cottonwood tree, slightly removed from the main crowd. As they ate, Preston pointed out various townsfolk, adding comments about each one: the blacksmith who could shoe a horse faster than anyone in the territory, the schoolteacher who had come from Boston and stayed when she married a local rancher, the banker who was fair but cautious with loans. "You know everyone," Winona observed. "In a town this size, it's hard not to. Most of these folks I've known all my life. Others I've done business with. A man's reputation is his most valuable possession out here. And what's your reputation, Mr. Callahan?" He smiled at her use of the formal address, which she sometimes reverted to when teasing him. "Depends who you ask. Some might say I'm stubborn. Others might call it determined. And which is it?" "Both, probably," he admitted. "When I believe in something, I don't give up easily." After eating, they strolled along the creek. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground with patterns of light and shadow. Families played games, men discussed cattle prices, and women exchanged recipes and news. "It's a lovely community," Winona remarked. "It is," Preston agreed. "People look out for each other here. It's one of the things I appreciate about Silver Creek." "I can see why. In Missouri, at least in the circles I moved in after my marriage, everything was about appearances. Who had the finest house, the most expensive dresses, the most important connections? And you didn't care for that?" She considered her answer carefully. "I found it exhausting, and ultimately meaningless. When my husband died, all those fine connections disappeared overnight." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry that happened to you." "It was a valuable lesson," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "One learns who one's true friends are in times of hardship." "Is that why you came west? To start fresh?" "Partly," she admitted. "And partly because there was nothing left for me there. My husband's family made it clear I was no longer welcome once he was gone." The admission cost her. She hadn't spoken of it to anyone in Silver Creek, not even Rose, who had become something of a friend. Preston's expression darkened. "They turned you out?" "Their son's widow. They never approved of the match. My father had once done Thomas's father a great service, and when both my parents died, the marriage was arranged as a sort of repayment. When Thomas died without an heir, they saw no reason to continue supporting me. That's unconscionable, Preston said, his voice tight with anger on her behalf. It's in the past now, she said firmly. I prefer to look forward. He studied her face. You're a remarkable woman, Winona Hayes. The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. It was the first time he had called her anything but Mrs. Hayes. I'm merely practical, she replied. Looking backward serves no purpose. They continued their walk, the conversation turning to lighter topics. By the time they returned to the main gathering, Winona realized she had enjoyed herself more than she had in years. Preston was easy to talk to, thoughtful in his responses, and genuinely interested in her opinions. As the sun began to set, families packed up their belongings and headed home. Preston helped Winona into the buggy for the return journey to town. Thank you for accompanying me today, she said as they rode back. I enjoyed myself. As did I, he replied, his eyes on the road. Perhaps we could do it again sometime. The invitation hung in the air between them. Winona knew she should probably decline. She was still finding her footing in Silver Creek, establishing herself as a respectable widow and businesswoman. Accepting social invitations from an unmarried man might raise eyebrows. Yet something about Preston Callahan made her want to set aside convention. He had shown her nothing but respect and kindness since her arrival. I would like that, she said finally. His smile in the fading light was worth any potential gossip. Over the next few weeks, Winona fell into a comfortable routine. Her days were spent at the mercantile, where she had gradually taken over most of the bookkeeping duties, freeing Rose to focus on expanding their inventory. In the evenings, she worked on sewing projects, both alterations for customers and original designs that Rose had begun to display in the store window. Preston's visits to the mercantile became more frequent. He often arrived with small gifts, a particularly fine piece of leather he thought she might use for trim, wildflowers he'd picked on the way into town, once even a book of poetry he'd ordered from Denver because she'd mentioned enjoying Wordsworth. The townsfolk noticed. Winona caught the speculative glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Rose, however, seemed delighted by her brother's attention to Winona. I've never seen him like this, she confided one afternoon as they closed the shop. Preston's always been so focused on the ranch. I was beginning to think he'd never taken interest in anything or anyone else. We're merely friends, Winona protested, though she knew her feelings had grown beyond friendship. Of course, Rose agreed with a knowing smile. Just as the sun merely rises in the east. On a crisp October morning, Preston arrived at the mercantile earlier than usual. He seemed unusually nervous, shifting his hat in his hands as he approached the counter where Winona was arranging a display of buttons. Good morning, she greeted him. You're in town early today. I had some business at the bank, he explained, but I wanted to ask you something before I head back to the ranch. He glanced around the empty store. Is Rose here? She's in the back, taking inventory. He nodded, seeming relieved they wouldn't be overheard. I've been meaning to ask. That is, I was wondering if you might like to come out to the Double C on Sunday. For dinner, he added quickly. Rose will be there too, of course. And my foreman and his wife. Nothing improper. The hastily added reassurance made Winona smile. I would be delighted to see your ranch, Preston. His face relaxed into a smile. Wonderful. I'll come for you around 11 if that suits. It's about an hour's ride. 11 would be perfect. After he left, Rose emerged from the storeroom, a knowing expression on her face. So you're finally going to see the Double C, she remarked casually. You were eavesdropping, Winona accused without heat. Naturally. My brother inviting a woman to the ranch? This is unprecedented in my memory. She folded her arms, leaning against the counter. He's built something special out there, Winona. That ranch is his heart. He speaks of it with great pride. Pride, yes. But also love. The double C was our father's dream, but Preston has made it his own. The fact that he wants to show it to you. She left the implication hanging. Winona busied herself with the button display, not wanting Rose to see how much the invitation meant to her. As he said, "You'll be there, along with others." This time, Rose agreed. "But mark my words, my brother has intentions beyond neighborly friendship," Winona Hayes. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. In the months since arriving in Silver Creek, Winona had come to care deeply for Preston. His steady presence, his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness all had worked their way into her heart. But she had not expected to find love again, certainly not so soon after being cast out by her first husband's family. Sunday arrived clear but cool. Winona dressed carefully in her best riding habit, a deep green wool that complemented her fair coloring. She had altered it recently to better suit Western riding, which she had been learning under Rose's tutelage. Preston arrived precisely at 11, driving a light wagon rather than the buggy he usually used in town. "The road gets rough in places," he explained as he helped her up. "This will be more comfortable." The journey to the Double C took them through rolling hills covered in golden autumn grass. Preston pointed out landmarks along the way, the creek that ran through his property, the distant mountains where he grazed cattle in summer months, the stand of cottonwoods where his father had built the first cabin when he claimed the land. As they crested a final hill, the ranch spread out before them. Winona's breath caught at the sight. Nestled in a valley with mountains rising behind it, the Double C was larger and more impressive than she had imagined. A substantial two-story house of hewn logs stood proudly among several outbuildings. Fenced corrals contained horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on open range. A bunkhouse, barn, and what appeared to be a blacksmith shop completed the complex. Everything was well maintained, speaking of prosperity and careful stewardship. "Preston, it's beautiful," she said sincerely. His expression softened as he gazed at his home. "It's taken years to build it to this point. My father started with just the small cabin behind the main house. Everything else, we've added bit by bit." "You must be very proud." "I am," he admitted. "Not just of the buildings or the cattle, but of what it represents. A place that's ours. Something built to last." They drove down into the valley, and as they approached the house, Winona saw Rose waving from the porch. Beside her stood a tall man with graying hair and a woman about Winona's age. "That's Jim Barrett, my foreman, and his wife Lucy," Preston explained. "They live in the smaller house just beyond the barn. Jim's been with us since I was a boy." The introductions were made, and Winona was ushered into the main house. The interior was surprisingly refined for a bachelor's residence. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, the floors covered with quality rugs, and the walls adorned with a few good paintings. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with comfortable chairs arranged around it. "Rose has had a hand in the decorating," Preston admitted when Winona commented on the pleasant surroundings. "Left to my own devices, it would be considerably more Spartan." "He'd have a chair, a table, and a bed," Rose confirmed with a laugh. "Men have no sense of comfort." Lunch was served in a dining room with windows overlooking the valley. The food was simple but excellently prepared: roast beef, vegetables from the ranch's garden, fresh bread, and an apple pie for dessert. "Lucy made the pie," Rose explained. "She's a much better baker than I am." After the meal, Preston offered to show Winona around the property. They walked first to the barns, where he showed her the horses he was particularly proud of, including a young colt with promising bloodlines. "He'll make a fine cow pony when he's trained," Preston said, stroking the animal's glossy neck. "Got the right temperament, smart, but not stubborn." From there, they strolled to a small rise that offered a view of much of the ranch. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land, highlighting its contours. Preston pointed out the boundaries of his property, explaining how he had expanded it over the years by purchasing adjacent parcels when they became available. Most of what you can see from here is Double C land, he said, except for that section to the northwest that belongs to the Wilson family. Been trying to buy it for years, but old man Wilson won't sell. It's truly impressive, Preston. You've accomplished so much. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I've built something I'm proud of, yes. But lately I've been thinking it's not complete. What's missing? She asked, though something in his tone made her heart beat faster. A home needs more than just buildings and land, Winona. It needs. He hesitated, then continued more softly. It needs laughter. Family. Someone to share it with. The implication was clear. Winona felt a rush of emotions, hope, fear, longing. Preston, he held up a hand. I'm not asking anything of you today. It's too soon, I know that. You're still establishing yourself in Silver Creek, still healing from how your husband's family treated you. I just wanted you to see this place, to understand what matters to me. The consideration in his words touched her deeply. He wasn't pressuring her, merely letting her know his feelings and giving her time to consider her own. Thank you for showing me, she said softly. It means a great deal to me. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. Then, by mutual agreement, they turned and walked back toward the house, Preston's hand occasionally brushing against hers. As they approached, Winona noticed a rider coming fast up the road to the ranch. Preston saw him too and frowned. That's Danny, one of my hands. He's supposed to be watching the north pasture today. The young cowboy reined his horse to a stop in front of them, his face flushed with exertion. Mr. Callahan. Trouble up north. Rustlers hit us, drove off about 30 head. Preston's expression hardened. When? Must have been last night. Found the cut fence this morning. Tracked Emma ways before coming back to report. Get Jim and 3 men. I'll meet you at the barn in 5 minutes. As Danny rode off, Preston turned to Winona, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry. I need to handle this. Of course, she said quickly. Do what you must. He escorted her back to the house, explaining the situation to Rose. I don't know how long this will take. They've got a head start on us. Should I take Winona back to town? Rose asked. Preston hesitated, looking at Winona. Would you mind staying? I'd feel better knowing you were here, and Jim's wife Lucy will remain as well. I'll drive you back when I return. I'm happy to stay, Winona assured him. Please be careful. He nodded, his expression grim but determined. Cattle rustling is a serious offense. We'll be careful, but we need to catch them. Within minutes, Preston and 4 cowboys rode out, rifles in their saddle scabbards and determination on their faces. Winona watched from the porch until they disappeared over a rise. Rose sighed beside her. The life of a rancher's family, never knowing when trouble will come. Does this happen often? Rustling? More than we'd like, less than it used to. Most folks around here are honest, but there are always those looking for easy money. She gave Winona a sideways glance. It doesn't frighten you? This side of ranch life. Winona considered the question seriously. It concerns me, of course. I wouldn't want Preston or anyone to be in danger. But it doesn't frighten me away, if that's what you're asking. Rose smiled. Good answer. The afternoon passed slowly. Lucy Barrett joined them for tea, sharing stories of her 20 years on the Double C. As the sun set with no sign of the men, the women prepared a simple supper and kept a pot of stew warm on the stove for the returning party. It was well after dark when they heard horses approaching. Winona, who had been pretending to read but actually watching the window, stood immediately. Rose laid a restraining hand on her arm. Let them get settled. Preston will come in when he's ready. Lucy nodded agreement. Men need a moment to transition from the trail. Jim's the same way, needs to see to his horse and wash up before he's fit for polite company. So Winona waited, fighting the urge to rush outside. After what seemed an eternity, the door opened, and Preston entered, followed by Jim Barrett. Both men looked tired but satisfied. "You caught them?" Rose asked. Preston nodded, removing his hat. "3 men. We recovered most of the cattle." "Anyone hurt?" Lucy asked, her eyes on her husband. "No, madam," Jim replied. "They surrendered when they saw they were outnumbered. Sheriff's got them locked up in town." "I've got men bringing the cattle back," Preston added. "They'll be here by morning." His eyes sought Winona's. "I'm sorry about all this." "There's no need to apologize," she assured him. "I'm just glad you're safe." The relief in his expression was worth the hours of waiting. After the men had eaten and Jim had returned to his own cabin, Preston finally had a moment alone with Winona while Rose busied herself in the kitchen. "This wasn't how I planned your visit to end," he said ruefully. "I wanted it to be perfect. Life rarely goes according to plan," she replied with a small smile. "But I've had a lovely day, Preston. Your home is beautiful, and I'm honored you wanted to share it with me." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I'd like to share more than just today with you, Winona. I know it might be too soon to say this, but I've developed strong feelings for you. Stronger than I expected." Her heart hammered in her chest. "I feel the same," she admitted softly. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of trusting again. Of believing I could have a place where I truly belong." His blue eyes were serious as he looked at her. "I can't promise life will always be easy. Today proves that. But I can promise you'll never be cast aside, never be made to feel unwelcome. If you're willing to give us a chance, I'd like to court you properly." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. "I would like that very much, Preston." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then that settled. It was nearly midnight when Preston finally drove Winona back to town. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the sky. They spoke little during the journey, but the silence was comfortable, filled with new understanding and possibility. At the boarding house, he helped her down from the wagon, holding her hands a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Winona," he said softly. "Thank you for today." "Good night, Preston. Be safe on your ride home." He waited until she was safely inside before driving away. In her room, Winona stood at the window, watching until his wagon disappeared down the street. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt the weight of loneliness lifting. Silver Creek was becoming more than just a refuge, it was becoming home. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Winona's life. Preston courted her with a thoughtfulness that touched her deeply. He visited the mercantile regularly, often bringing small tokens, a wildflower, a book, once even a kitten he'd rescued from a barn. "The little fellow needs a home," he'd explained as the tiny calico purred in Winona's hands. "Thought you might like the company." She named the kitten Thistle for his spiky fur and stubborn personality. Mrs. Holloway, initially skeptical about allowing pets in the boarding house, relented when she saw how well-behaved the cat was. Winter approached, bringing shorter days and colder nights. Business at the mercantile increased as people prepared for the season, stocking up on supplies before travel became difficult. Winona's dressmaking skills were in high demand, particularly for holiday gatherings and the annual Christmas dance. "You should charge more," Rose advised as Winona worked on an elaborate gown for the banker's wife. "Your work is worth it." "Perhaps next year," Winona replied. "For now, I'm building a reputation." It was a Saturday afternoon in early December when Preston arrived at the mercantile with an unusual request. "Would you be free tomorrow to help me with something at the ranch?" he asked. "It's a surprise." "A surprise?" Winona repeated, intrigued. "What kind of surprise requires my help?" "The kind I can't explain without ruining it," he replied with a grin. "Rose will be there too. Say you'll come." "Very well," she agreed, curious. "Though I warn you, I don't like mysteries. You'll like this one, he promised. The next day dawned clear and cold. Preston arrived to collect Winona after church, his wagon equipped with thick blankets to ward off the chill. Rose rode with them, unusually secretive about the purpose of their visit. As they approached the Double C, Winona noticed activity near a stand of trees some distance from the main house. A small structure was taking shape there, with several men working on it. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. Preston and Rose exchanged glances. "That's part of the surprise," he said. But not all of it. They continued to the main house, where Lucy Barrett greeted them with hot coffee. After they had warmed themselves, Preston suggested a walk. "If you're up for it," he added. "It's cold out there." "I'm curious enough to brave the cold," Winona assured him. They bundled up again, and Preston led her toward the structure she had noticed earlier. As they drew closer, she could see it was a small cabin, nearly complete, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. "Is this for one of your hands?" she asked. "No," Preston replied, his expression unreadable. "It's for you." Winona stopped in her tracks. "For me? I don't understand." He took her gloved hands in his. "When you told me how your husband's family drove you out, how you had nowhere to call your own, it haunted me. I wanted to build you a place that would be yours, no matter what. Somewhere no one could ever make you leave." Tears sprang to her eyes, blurring her vision. "Preston, let me show you," he said gently, leading her forward. The cabin was simple but charming. A main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, a bedroom, and a tiny second room that could serve as a study or guest room. The windows were large, letting in plenty of light, and the workmanship was excellent. "Jim's brother is a carpenter," Preston explained as they toured the space. "He's been working on it for weeks. The furniture will arrive next week." Winona was overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say. This is the most generous gift anyone has ever given me." "It's yours," Preston said firmly, "regardless of anything else. I've had papers drawn up. This cabin and an acre around it belong to you, Winona Hayes." She turned to him, tears now flowing freely. "Why would you do this?" "Because I love you," he said simply. "And I want you to have security, independence, a place where you belong." The declaration hung in the air between them. Winona's heart felt too full for her chest. "I love you too," she whispered. "But I can't accept such a gift. It's too much." "You can and you will," he insisted gently. "Consider it an early Christmas present if you like. Or rent it from me for $1 a year, if that makes you feel better." She laughed through her tears. "You are the most stubborn man I've ever known, Preston Callahan." "Only when it matters," he replied, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "And you matter more than anything, Winona." Before she could respond, he knelt in the middle of the unfinished cabin, taking a small box from his pocket. "I had a whole speech prepared, but seeing you here, in this place I built for you, words seem inadequate. Winona Hayes, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" The ring in the box was a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, not ostentatious, but beautiful and clearly chosen with care. For a moment, Winona couldn't speak. The journey from her painful departure from Missouri to this moment seemed almost unbelievable. She had come to Silver Creek broken and alone, expecting nothing more than survival. Instead, she had found work she enjoyed, friends who valued her, and a man who loved her enough to build her a home of her own. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Preston." He stood and gathered her in his arms, his kiss tender but passionate. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you'll never regret this decision." "I know," she said simply. And she did know, with a certainty that surprised her. Preston Callahan was nothing like Thomas or his family. What he offered was not obligation or charity, but partnership and love. They walked back to the main house hand in hand, where Rose and the Barretts were waiting anxiously. The moment they entered, Rose took one look at their faces and let out a joyful cry. She said yes. I knew she would. The rest of the afternoon was spent in celebration. Rose had prepared a special dinner, and Jim produced a bottle of fine whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. They toasted the engagement, and plans were immediately discussed for the wedding. Spring would be lovely, Rose suggested. When the wildflowers are blooming. I'd prefer sooner, Preston admitted, his eyes on Winona. But it's your decision. Winona considered. There was no reason to wait, no family to consult, no elaborate preparations needed. After Christmas, she decided. Perhaps New Year's Day. A fresh start. Preston's smile was radiant. New Year's Day it is. That evening, as Preston drove Winona back to town, the stars seemed especially bright. The weight that had pressed on her heart since being cast out by the Hayes family had finally lifted completely. Silver Creek was no longer just a refuge, it was truly her home. Will you move into the cabin before the wedding? Preston asked as they approached the boarding house. Would that be proper? She asked, though she longed to have a place of her own again. With Rose as chaperone until the wedding, no one could object, he pointed out. And it would give you time to make it your own. Add those feminine touches I'm sure it needs. The idea appealed to her. I'd like that. Once it's finished and furnished. 2 weeks, then, he said decisively. Just in time for Christmas. As he helped her down from the wagon, he pulled her close for a moment. I meant what I said, Winona. That cabin is yours, no matter what. I never want you to feel dependent or trapped. The consideration behind the gift touched her deeply. Thank you for understanding what that means to me. I want to give you everything, he said softly. Security, independence, a family. Love. You already have, she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him once more before going inside. News of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek. Most people expressed genuine pleasure, though Winona noticed a few disappointed looks from young women who had apparently harbored hopes regarding the town's most eligible bachelor. Mrs. Bennett from the newspaper requested an interview, which Winona reluctantly granted, keeping her answers about her past deliberately vague. At the Mercantile, business continued briskly as the holiday season approached. Rose was ecstatic about the engagement and already planning improvements to the main house at the Double C. Preston's let it become too masculine, she complained good-naturedly. It needs a woman's touch. I wouldn't want to change too much, Winona replied. It's a beautiful home as it is. It will be even more beautiful with you in it, Rose assured her. 2 weeks passed quickly. The cabin was completed, furnished simply but comfortably with pieces Preston had ordered from Denver. Winona added touches of her own curtains she had sewn, a quilt for the bed, small items she had collected since arriving in Silver Creek. When it was ready, she stood in the doorway, marveling at the fact that this charming place belonged to her. It's perfect, she told Preston. I can't believe you did this for me. It's just the beginning, he promised. We have a lifetime ahead of us to build together. Moving from the boarding house took little time. Winona's possessions still fit in a single trunk, though she had acquired a few more things during her months in Silver Creek. Mrs. Holloway was sorry to see her go, but understood the desire for a place of one's own. You've landed on your feet, my dear, the landlady said as they said goodbye. Preston Callahan is a good man. You deserve each other. The days leading up to Christmas were busy but joyful. Winona divided her time between the Mercantile, her new cabin, and preparations for the wedding. Preston visited daily, sometimes staying for supper, always respectful of propriety with Rose present as chaperone. On Christmas Eve, a light snow fell, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. The Callahans hosted a dinner at the main house, inviting the Barretts and several of the ranch hands who had no family nearby. The house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and a tall tree stood in the corner of the main room, adorned with candles and simple ornaments. After dinner, gifts were exchanged. Winona had made Preston a new shirt, finer than any he usually wore, with subtle embroidery on the collar and cuffs. For Rose, she had crafted a shawl of soft blue wool that complemented her dark coloring. Preston's gift to Winona was a small wooden box, beautifully carved with wildflowers. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a gold locket. "Open it," he urged. Inside were two tiny photographs, one of Preston, looking uncharacteristically formal, and one of the cabin he had built for her. "So, you'll always have home close to your heart," he explained. The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." As the evening wound down, Preston walked Winona back to her cabin through the gently falling snow. Rose had tactfully remained behind, giving them a few minutes of privacy. On the porch, Preston took Winona in his arms. "1 week," he murmured. "1 week, and you'll be my wife." "I can hardly believe it," she admitted. "Sometimes I fear I'll wake up and find this has all been a dream." "Not a dream," he assured her, his lips brushing her forehead. "A new beginning." New Year's Day dawned clear and cold. The wedding was to be held at the small church in Silver Creek, with a reception afterward at the Double C. Rose helped Winona dress in the cream-colored gown they had worked on together, simple but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her honey-blonde hair was arranged in a soft knot, adorned with small white flowers. "You look beautiful," Rose said, adjusting the veil. "My brother is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Winona replied, touching the locket that hung around her neck, her Christmas gift from Preston. They rode to the church in a sleigh decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the occasion. The church was filled to capacity, with people standing at the back when the seats were taken. As Winona walked down the aisle, her eyes locked with Preston's. He stood tall and handsome in a new suit, his expression one of wonder and love. In that moment, all her doubts and fears vanished. This was right. This was where she belonged. The ceremony was simple but moving. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all that was to come. The reception at the Double C lasted well into the evening. Neighbors and friends came to offer congratulations and share in the celebration. There was music and dancing, food and drink, laughter and joy. Winona, now Mrs. Callahan, found herself surrounded by people who genuinely wished her well, a stark contrast to the cold society she had left behind in Missouri. As the party continued, Preston led his bride away from the crowd, out onto the porch of the main house. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the winter sky. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "I have one more surprise for you," he said, turning her gently to face the direction of her cabin. In the moonlight, she could see it had been decorated with lanterns, casting a warm glow through the windows. "Your wedding gift," he explained. "I had the men add something while we were at the church." Curious, Winona allowed him to lead her toward the cabin. As they drew closer, she could see the addition, a second covered porch, connected to the first, extending the front of the small building. "I don't understand," she said, puzzled. Preston's smile was tender. "You needed your own place, a home no one could take from you. I understood that. But I was hoping. That is, I thought perhaps you might allow me to build my home alongside yours." Understanding dawned. The second porch was the beginning of another cabin, connected to hers but distinct, a visual representation of their relationship. Together but independent, joined but separate. "It will take time to complete," Preston continued. "And in the meantime, we'll live in the main house. But eventually this could be our private retreat, a place that belongs to just us." Tears of joy filled Winona's eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Inside, the cabin had been transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, and the bed was turned down, inviting and intimate. A fire crackled in the fireplace, warding off the winter chill. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," Preston said softly, gathering her into his arms. As his lips met hers, Winona knew she had found not just a home, but a heart to match her own. From the ashes of rejection and loss, something beautiful had grown, a love strong enough to last a lifetime, built on respect, understanding, and trust. 5 years later, Winona stood on the porch of the joined cabins, watching her husband approach on horseback. Their 3-year-old son, Thomas James Callahan, named for both their fathers, raced across the yard to meet him, his little legs pumping with excitement. Behind her, their infant daughter Sarah Rose slept peacefully in her cradle, unaware of the commotion outside. The Double C had prospered under Preston's stewardship, expanding to become one of the largest and most successful ranches in the territory. The mercantile, now managed primarily by Rose with Winona's occasional assistance, had grown as well, adding a millinery department and dress shop specializing in Winona's designs. As Preston dismounted and swung their son up onto his shoulders, his eyes met Winona's across the yard. The love in his gaze was as strong as it had been on their wedding day, perhaps even stronger for the years they had shared, the challenges they had overcome together, the family they had created. He walked toward her, their son chattering excitedly about his day. When he reached the porch, Preston leaned in to kiss his wife, a gesture as natural as breathing after 5 years of marriage. "How are my girls?" he asked, his free hand gently touching Sarah's downy head. "Waiting for you," Winona replied with a smile. "Always waiting for you." As they entered their home together, the unique joined cabins that symbolized their partnership, Winona reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a young widow cast out by her husband's family to a beloved wife, mother, and respected member of the community, her path had not been easy. But every step, every hardship, had led her to this place, this life, this love. Preston had built her a home when she needed it most, not just a physical structure, but a place in his heart, his family, his future. And together, they had built something even more precious, a life filled with love, trust, and belonging. The cabin that had once been her refuge was now the heart of their family's world. And as the sun set over the Double C, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, Winona Callahan knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home at last.